My husband Nick is a glasses wearer. He does everything with his glasses on. First thing in the morning, he puts them on. Last thing at night, he takes them off, and he is absolutely useless without them in terms of sight. This is an old pair of Nick's glasses. So you can see already how intense the magnification is. Look, this is what life through his glasses looks like. And you can see they get really smeared and we have to clean them and then they break and we have to fix them and it costs a lot of money. And all in all, it's hard work being a glasses wearer. But imagine what it'd be like if you wore these glasses and you didn't really need them. Oh my word, everything goes crazy. I can't even see any shapes or any forms through those, and you'll notice that my eyes were really distorted. Now, the frame of life we have is a bit like the glasses we wear. It shapes everything we see. We look through a frame of reference. We often call it a worldview or a set of beliefs. And this session 1 of Know Your Why, we're going to look at the concept of worldview or frame of reference. We're going to start with the very, very big picture about life. We're going to do some digging and exploring. I'm going to show you some of my tools to see if you can find where you are in terms of a worldview. What shapes the way you see everything? What is your frame of reference? The pair of glasses that you wear to look at life. And although that sounds like a really big concept, a real challenge for session 1, I think it's really important that we start there. Because you will come to see that although this is very conceptual and philosophical, it's also intensely pragmatic. Because how you see everything is how you see anything. How you see the world is actually how you see your world. And how you see everybody is how you see you. Somebody once said, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. Or this is a quote from Proust I really love. The greatest adventure in life is not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And so that is what this adventure of Know Your Why is all about. It's having new eyes. It's changing the way you see, changing the place that you see from. And let me tell you, that has the potential to change everything about you. So what we're going to do in this session is I'm going to show you 2 models, 2 concepts that I use and that we are going to own together as Know Your Why. So we have a starting place for talking about some of this stuff because it is complicated, it is involved, and it's potentially triggering. There will be a whole load of good reasons why you hold the particular frame of reference that you do. And that will be multi-layered depending on your experience of life, depending on your upbringing, depending on the things that have happened to you or haven't happened to you. And so when we go wading into this stuff, it becomes quite emotive. And I really hope that this becomes a safe place for you to share some of your perspectives and think through and zoom in on some of your emotions. But we start by looking at 2 lenses, I guess, on humanity, on how we see this project universe. And rather than talking about specific beliefs, I'm going to talk about a scale of belief, 2 scales in fact. The first is about engagement and the second one is about value. So let's start with engagement. Now it's pretty obvious from this scale that engaged is better than disengaged. We'd all agree with that, but it's very subtle. And I propose that there are 2 polar opposites when it comes to how engaged we are, how engaging our worldview is, the expectation of our involvement in our life is. And one is that we become disengaged by being always positive, unfounded optimism, I call it. And the other is that we disengage by becoming cynical. And this is very subtle. It often happens over a long period of time. It isn't a choice we make, but the effect of layering of experiences and preferences. So to be unfoundedly optimistic is to have a view of the world, everything's going to be okay. You know, don't worry, it will be fine. Everything works out well in the end. Some kind of positive fatalism. At its worst, this is obviously complete detachment from reality and refusal to engage with the difficult parts of life or the things we don't understand. But there are many shades of this that are much more subtle, but gradually disengage us from the world. So I'm thinking about, you know, the worst kinds of the law of attraction or positive psychology that really cocoons us and cushions us seemingly from the challenges of being a human in the world and says it's going to be okay, it will all work out. And of course it doesn't always all work out. We are so very much aware of that at the moment. And then at the other end of the scale, there is cynicism and disconnection by being disappointed, disillusioned, and generally writing everything off. So this worldview says, well, it's all going to the dogs anyway. What can I do about it? And I'm just a little piece in a very big machine, and things will run their course. And it's just not a very nice world that we live in. And that view is devoid of hope at its extreme, or just at its more subtle forms, a bit of a resignation to the world and a passivism and a disenfranchisement with our agency as human beings to make a difference in the world. And right smack bang in the middle of those two, cynicism or unfounded optimism, is engagement. It's holding with one hand hope in a better tomorrow. And it's holding with the other hand acceptance of the harsh realities of planet Earth and the way that we live now. And it's refusing to let go of either of those things and somehow walking along in the tension of holding those things together. Because hope says everything is to play for. You have a place, you have a role, you can make a difference. But acceptance says life is going to be tough. There is no such thing as a silver bullet. There's no such thing as overnight success. You're going to need to work hard, dig in, face things, own up to stuff, change, evolve, cry, have pain. And that's okay. And so here is really, I guess, the first page that I want us to all get on together, where we can say life is about engaging with ourselves, our world, our future. And any subtle disengagement, however clever or nice it seems, is really a distraction from the real work of being a human. We need to engage. So that's the first frame. The second frame is about the value of human life. And again, I've put a sliding scale because I want you to think about maybe where you sit on this scale, where you'd like to sit, where you have sat in the past, whether there's some elements on this scale of human value that you can own, or whether you can aspire to this particular scale. And again, I'm sure it will push a number of buttons for people and raise a number of questions, and that is all part of the work of engagement in your life. So in this scale, we have at one end low value, and at the other end, high value. And of course, we all can see that the higher the value we have for life, the better. That's pretty obvious for me to say. And really, I don't need to put too fine a point on how at the very bottom end you have the worst kinds of evil and depravity that we can imagine. And let's not spend too much time actually thinking about that. But the kind of hideous acts of violence against people that we know to be part of our history come from a very low view of human beings, a low value for life. But moving up, we have what I'm calling degradation, where we can somehow stomach some levels of defacing, devaluing, brutalizing certain people, may be restricted around their class or their gender or where they're from or how they look. And it seems right to us that some people have no value at all. And obviously slavery and modern day slavery would be an example of this low value worldview where we're really selective and we say some lives matter and other lives don't matter. And then I've talked about limited value, how actually our value depends maybe on what we've achieved, what we're capable of. Some people are just worth more than others. Some people are cleverer or deserve more, or white privilege, or many ways in which this is packaged up nicely, and we really are prepared to accept a level of injustice about the way the world is and the way we relate to other people. And again, it's often very subtle. Racism is often very subtle. But our limited value for life would include things that we don't really want to face, or things that seem very different from us. And the best examples of people who are inspiring and motivating and have changed the face of our world for good, they hold a much more generous view of things, a view that I'm calling intrinsic value. So we have all seen the global campaign Black Lives Matter that is upholding, very controversially, the value for Black lives and seeking to right the wrongs and restore balance and inclusivity to a worldview that has said for generations that some are more privileged than others. That would be an example of intrinsic value, that all lives matter. Past not accepting, gender not accepting, race or ethnicity or family of origin or class or caste or any number of exterior divisions not accepting. All lives have value. You will not meet another human being that doesn't have intrinsic value. And then right at the highest level, as I see it, of this value chart is the idea of a divine spark. That not only do all lives matter and all lives matter equally, but all lives contain a spark of the divine. All lives contain an essence that is untouchable and imperishable and is a reflection of divine life. The capacity for genius, for creativity, for generosity, for empowering others, for making a difference. It's not just our nature, but it's somehow a reflection of our source, however you like to call that, however you think of benevolent source of life, nature in its highest form, spirit, God, divinity. That we're not separate, we are in fact part of a much, much, much infinitely large and therefore infinite value ideal. And it's not even an ideal. In fact, no word really fits for this category. And when you love somebody for a very long time, when you really see their value, they do take on, in your eyes, a divine quality where you see them as so precious and so wonderful. And I believe that that capacity for love is in the heart of every person towards other people because of that ignition, that spark, that breath of eternal value, of something bigger, something greater, something we couldn't possibly begin to understand or express, but something that gives life its very essence. And if you think about the implications of that, of living with a sense of the divinity of the other, of the specialness, of the value of the other, wow, that really changes everything. That really resets up the playing field and is a very different imagined future. And you may not be able to buy into all of my ideas about value, but I want you to think about where you are on the scale and how you see human beings, how you see life on planet Earth. What's your biggest macro view lens on life? What's the pair of glasses you're wearing? Do they elevate others in your own eyes, or do they diminish them? Do they add value, or do they decrease it? And is there a way of enlarging, elevating the way you see things? Because it will really matter how you see everything. I've been a coach for a number of years, and we have this term in therapy work and in coaching, which is like our like kind of gold standard for how we would relate to a client who's coming to see us, and it's called unconditional positive regard. Which, if you think about it, is just another way of saying the word love. But it works so well in a therapy context because as a therapist, you're creating a totally safe space for your client to be fully themselves and to be fully accepted. Not judged, not compared, not written off, but that sense of holding a space where they can really grow and really express themselves and be the very most honest version of themselves. And this idea of unconditional positive regard, I want not just to be confined to the therapy room, but to be something we can bring into our everyday lives. And in the way that we relate to ourselves, can practice that. Can become like our own coach, where we hold space for ourselves in unconditional positive regard. And I believe this idea of unconditional positive regard really is only born out of our worldview, our macro lens on life. And I think that when you see humanity as having a high value, it's easy to translate that to yourself. It's easy to think of yourself as having a high value. And you know, the standard you set for yourself, what you aim for, determines where you reach. I love the quote that says, "Shoot for the stars and you'll reach the moon." Having a high bar for yourself enables you not to settle for less. And so when we think about our understanding of our own self-regard, we can ask ourselves, is it positive? Because sometimes hidden under the layers of our thinking is a really quite negative, critical, harsh, shaming, hating, or judgmental view of ourselves. You'd be surprised at the number of people who walk around with a low regard for self. And even people who masquerade as being arrogant or confident or just sure of themselves have a secret life of inadequacy. And as a therapist and a coach, I sometimes see this in people, and I know I've seen it in my own life. And I know the power of accepting oneself unconditionally and regarding oneself positively. Because the unconditional bit is often very difficult to really consistently hold. Because we see all our worst bits. We see all our best bits, but we see our worst bits. We see our contradictions, and we see the times where we've really messed it up, or we have been inwardly cowardly or inwardly quite malicious. And so unconditional positive regard is a really difficult thing to pull off. But I believe that just as in therapy, it's the gold standard for effective work with a client. In our personal lives, it is the gold standard for personal growth. If we can really hold ourselves in positive regard unconditionally, we create what I'm going to talk about later in session 4 as a greenhouse effect. We create the conditions for growth. Now, let me just take a little segue here, because very quickly, when we start talking about why, about self-awareness, about knowing things, we get into the whole territory of thoughts and the mind. And here it gets a little weird, a little warpy, and we start having to think about our thinking, which is a thing. It's called mindsight. The ability to see your mind at the same time as being in it. We're going to come back to this concept quite a lot. Meta thinking or mindsight, where we can simultaneously think thoughts and reflect on them, be aware of our thoughts. And I've been really impacted by the work of a guy called Dave Gray, who wrote a book called Liminal Thinking. And I think he quite brilliantly expresses a really hard to understand concept, but one that is critical for Know Your Why. A bit like I was talking about with the glasses, your frame on everything. He has an idea that I have developed and I call the mountain of your current reality. And it looks something like this. We all stand atop of our own constructed mountain of thoughts. It's a mountain that we've developed all our lives from the very, very earliest days, where as we layered understanding on new learning, on experience, on cognition, we built up a picture of life, a worldview that we are totally taking for granted every minute of our day. It's kind of like the ground that we stand on, except it's a ground that we made. It's, if you imagine a really big pile of stuff that we have, we start from on top of that pile and we look out across the world and we see other people in other places, and we're a bit confused as to how they got there, but they also have their own mountain of reality, with the layered experience of their life, where they come from, how they think, their personality, what's happened to them. And so we see there's a very great difference. And some people, their mountains are quite close to ours, constructed in maybe a similar way, and we've reached a similar place of values, beliefs, understanding, and that's quite relatable. But the idea is that our mind continually reinforces our mountain of current reality, which is where it gets a little bit warpy, because in Dave's words, we have this idea of self-sealing logic. Our thoughts get reflected in our feelings, and our experience, our actions are born out of all of that. And so our thoughts get reflected in our experience, and we kind of go around this loop. I'm going to talk more about specifically the mind-body loop in the next session. But if we start to examine the mountain of our current reality, we realize that it's made up of different levels or different layers. There's the unknowable reality. And if you've ever listened to a talk about quantum physics or the origins of the species, it does seem very difficult to wrap your head around. It is very difficult to wrap your head around. Us with our limited thinking, our just small human brains, cannot really understand the complexity, the weirdness, the magnitude of time-space continuum that we exist in. And so we have to construct these mountains to stand on. And they're made up of experience, of thoughts, of our needs. When our needs get met, it creates this sense of stability and a place to stand. And there's some assumptions. We make guesses all the time. Our brain is brilliant at guessing. But there's the assumptions. We don't know why we think something, but it just seems right to us. And the conclusions, the cognition, the language that we put to things, our way of explaining our meaning and how we see things. And on top of that are our beliefs. They're not handed to us, they're actually created by everything we've experienced in life. And so the conclusion that we need to come to, which is critical for this course, is that how I experience reality is not how reality actually is. I find it helpful to think of two T's, a big T, capital, and a lowercase t, a little t. And although your mountain of reality is real, it's real for you, it is how you experience life. Your thoughts are real thoughts, your feelings are real feelings, and they need validating. It's a little t truth, not a big T truth. Truth is much more complex, much more nuanced, and much larger than we really can get a handle on. And having the humility to understand that the way we see things now is not the way they really are. When I think back over my life and I think of how much I've changed my mind on myself and others and how the world is, the development of my psyche, the development of my understanding has involved a large scale movements of my mountain from one place to another, where I have deconstructed parts and reconstructed parts, and it really is very fluid. And yet in the moment it just seems so obvious. It's the obvious. This is how it is, but this is only how it is for me. And as we develop mindsight, as we can have that big step back view of the world, we are able to ask ourselves the question, how much is this mountain serving me? How effective is my worldview? How is it being from me to live with, for others to experience me through? Is it really as generative, as large, and as generous as I want it to be? Or can I let go of some of the beliefs I have constructed, some of the ways of seeing the world that I have agreed with, and get some better ones, some elevated ones, some evolved ones, some ones that serve me better, that maybe give me a clearer view of the world. And so that's where we're going to leave session 1 of Know Your Why. And I invite you to join me again for session 2, where we're going to explore these ideas in more detail and journey together in really knowing our why.